Hello, my name is Alicia Ng. I'm a consultant with The Trend is Blue. Today we'll be talking about cycling and carbon emissions. When most people think of bicycles and their impact on the environment, they think mainly about how much it saves in carbon emissions. However, this is not a zero sum. When you take into account the life cycle of a bicycle, bicycles are not completely emissions-free due to their production and manufacture. However, bicycles are generally seen as ZEV, otherwise known as zero emissions vehicle, and have a carbon footprint that is substantially lower compared to other common forms of transport. The bicycle is also the greenest vehicle possible to own. How does the bicycle compare to other modes of transport? Findings from a report done by the European Cyclist Federation found that in a life cycle assessment of the car, bus, and bicycle, the car had 271 grams of CO2 emissions per passenger kilometer, whereas the bus only had 101 grams, half that of the car. Meanwhile, the bicycle was found to only have 21 grams, 10 times less than a car. The huge disparity is linked to the use of fossil fuels, which is the main source of anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. Transport is a major influence on climate change because of its greenhouse gas contribution. This flowchart is of greenhouse gas emissions from 1999 to 2003 in the United States, where transport makes up nearly a third of emissions. In the EU, for example, between 1990 and 2007, greenhouse gas emissions from transport increased by 36%, while greenhouse gas emissions from other sectors decreased by 15% during the same period. So where do carbon dioxide emissions in a bicycle come from? When looking at the life assessment of a bicycle in terms of carbon emissions, we focus on the production. Other factors, such as operation, maintenance, disposal, and infrastructure, are difficult to assess or deemed negligent. It is also difficult to find anything specific on the bicycle industry, as much of it is outsourced and globalized in nature. However, some calculations are out there. A recent MIT report calculated that manufacturing an average bicycle results in the emission of approximately 530 pounds of greenhouse gases. Another calculation came up with a total carbon footprint of 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalents for every $1,000 of manufacturing cost. From these two estimates, this would produce a bike that costs $265 to build, well within the range of manufacturing costs for a wide variety of bicycles on the market. To dig a bit deeper, so to speak, much of the carbon emissions created in the production of a bicycle are due to the extraction of minerals and the production of materials, such as steel, aluminium, and carbon fiber. The steel sector, for example, is one of the most significant contributors to greenhouse gas emissions of all industry sectors in the United States, second only to petroleum refining. Steel production's most harmful emissions are VOCs, nitrous oxides, and fine particles, as well as carbon dioxide emissions. EPA data, for example, was roughly 954,000 tons per year in 1996, and 1 million tons in 1999. Therefore, even though we don't know the global bicycle industry's contribution to carbon emissions from steel, we do know that the production, not even mentioning the mining of the ore, of steel is quite a dirty process. With aluminium, the major environmental impact of refining and smelting is greenhouse gas emissions. These gases result from both the electrical consumption of smelters and the byproducts of processing. The greenhouse gases resulting from primary production include perfluorocarbons, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, fluoride, sulfur dioxide, and carbon dioxide. Carbon fiber also has a relatively high environmental impact, closely linked to energy demand during its manufacture. However, for the same structural performance, less carbon fiber is needed in a composite product when compared with other fiber types, so its comparative environmental impact is reduced. However, research found that carbon fiber tends to be the most CO2 energy intensive. According to Remersvall, TUD, and Vormer, the actual energy needed is 7.5 millijoules per kilogram. Why are bicycles important to transport initiatives? Firstly, the EU has made climate mitigation an important policy measure. By 2050, the EU has set about reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 95% compared to 1990 levels. However, transport remains a challenge, as mentioned earlier. Despite the increase in greenhouse gas transport emissions, the EU will have to reduce emissions in the transport sector by an estimated 60%. An increase in cycling is believed to help greatly in meeting these transport targets. In what ways could these targets be met through the bicycle? London has seen a steady rise in the number of cyclists, with an increase of 70% compared to 2001 and 6% more from 2009 to 2010. That means that daily there are roughly 54,000 cyclists on the road in London. However, in London, the Mayor's Low Carbon Zones programme, meant to take a, quote, community approach to cutting the capital's carbon footprint, does not include cycling. Instead, cycling's revolution is stated in the Mayor's transport strategy. The strategy states that there will be unprecedented levels of investment in cycling over the next 10 years to improve cycle infrastructure and information. This will help secure the health, environmental, and congestion benefits of a cycle revolution. Firstly, the EU has made climate mitigation an important policy measure. By 2050, the EU has set about reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 95% compared to 1990 levels. However, transport remains a challenge, as mentioned earlier. Despite the increase in GHG transport emissions, the EU will have to reduce emissions in the transport sector by an estimated 60%. An increase in cycling is believed to help greatly in meeting these transport targets. In what ways could these targets be met through the bicycle? London has seen a steady rise in the number of cyclists, with an increase of 70% compared to 2001 and 6% more in 2010 than 2009. That means that daily there are roughly 54,000 cyclists on the road in London. However, in London, the Mayor's Low Carbon Zones programme, meant to take a, quote, community approach to cutting the capital's carbon footprint, does not include cycling. Instead, cycling's revolution is stated in the Mayor's transport strategy. The strategy states that there will be unprecedented levels of investment in cycling over the next 10 years to improve cycle infrastructure and information. This will help secure the health, environmental, and congestion benefits of a cycle revolution. In terms of carbon finance, at the moment, projects that could help mitigate emissions and increase bicycle traffic would be through the CDM, Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Actions, otherwise known as NAMAs, or the voluntary carbon market. Other means, such as the voluntary carbon market, have been explored as well. The CDM has not yet worked to stimulate mitigation actions in transport. As of May 2011, only 0.6% of CDM project activities were transport related, and of the projects registered, only 0.2% took place in the transport sector. This limited application of transport projects under the current CDM is in large part due to difficulties in methodology and finance. NAMAs are voluntary emissions reduction measures by developing countries that are directly reported to the UNFCCC. The Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport is a proponent for NAMAs in transport policy, since in developed and developing countries, quote, only a long-term strategy and planning will result in conditions that make people to choose for walking and cycling instead of a car or motorized two-wheeler. Again, finance here is an issue. However, the partnership pushes for pilot NAMAs and to release the long-term cost benefits of building sustainable low-carbon transport. The voluntary carbon market has recently been explored as a means as well. A methodology is currently under development for determining GHG emission reductions through bicycle sharing projects. Many cities in developing countries, such as Cape Town, Delhi, and Rio de Janeiro, have made cycling and cycling infrastructure a transport initiative. For example, in Delhi, all new transport policies must include cycling and pedestrian facilities. This is headed by the National Ministry of Urban Development and partially funded by low-carbon funding. In Turkey as well, the cities of Sakarya and Antalya both were able to develop a cycling inclusive transport policy through the Dutch group Interface for Cycling Enterprise. Implementation of the pilot cycling routes began in 2011. It is hoped that these cities and others in the developed world may be able to catalyze their cycling initiatives further as fully accredited NAMA projects. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Alicia from The Trend is Blue.